You're listening to Forecast, the marketing podcast for professional services leaders. If you're looking to generate more leads, win more deals, and take your firm to the next level, this show is your shortcut. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Ahmed Monawar. Today, I've got Will Bachman on the show. Will is an independent management consultant. He's a founder of Umbrex, a global community of independent top-tier management consultants. He's also the host of a podcast called Unleashed, which talks about how to thrive as an independent management consultant. Will's story is fascinating for a couple of reasons. First of all, the story of how he left McKinsey to become an independent consultant is filled with lessons that we can all learn from. And second of all, in Will's role leading Umbrex, this global community of management consultants, he's developed a very unique perspective on what makes independent consultants thrive in their businesses. And you're going to hear a lot of that in today's interview. Show notes are going to be at forecast.fm/Bachman. That's forecast.fm/BACHMAN. Before I let you go, if you haven't yet joined us inside our free course on the 5 Ps of lead generation for professional service firms, you're going to want to check that out. Inside the course, I will show you a step-by-step process that you can follow to generate a flood of new business for your firm. The course is 100% free of charge, and you can get immediate access over at 5leadgen.com. You can spell out 5 or use the number. Either one works. That's 5leadgen.com. With that, here is Will Bachman. Will, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Ahmad, it's my pleasure to be here.
Why don't you get us started by telling us the story of how you got into the consulting business?
Well, consulting business a long time ago. I had spent 5 years in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear-trained submarine officer. And then I did a slightly unusual path. I took 3 years basically off, where I lived at a family farm and read all these books that I'd wanted to read in college and raised my own food and milked a goat and had honeybees. And then I eventually started thinking, okay, I need to get a real job. And I ended up, was on the Navy Reserves at the time, and did a 1 week kind of Navy Reserve duty in New York City and met a beautiful woman and started thinking maybe I should look for a job in New York City. Later married that woman. And along the way of thinking about getting a job in New York City, I reached out to some friends from college who had worked at McKinsey and Company and got an interview at McKinsey, and lo and behold, ended up as a business analyst at McKinsey.
No, so not really the traditional path then.
Not one that I would necessarily recommend to every listener as the traditional way to get into management consulting.
Right.
That's how I ended up in the firm. So I started out as a business analyst at McKinsey, loved it, did a year and a half, went to business school, went back to McKinsey, was there for another 4 years. And at that point, I was loving consulting. And for a lot of the reasons that many people start independent consulting, I decided to set up my own practice. And I loved the firm. It was a great training ground, great mentors and friends there. But I decided to start my own practice to have some more flexibility and some more control over my life in terms of the types of projects I did, and also partly just my own kind of interest. So I think to really thrive at a top-tier global consulting firm, you typically need to be pretty focused, right, on an industry and or a function. And I enjoyed much more being a bit of a generalist and working across industries. And that's a kind of a possible path as an independent, I found. But it wasn't really a winning strategy at a global consulting firm where clients demand like sort of deep world-class expertise in a particular industry.
And so what kind of work were you doing when you were at McKinsey?
So I did a mix. I did some strategy consulting work, and then I started doing a lot of operational consulting. McKinsey has a big operations practice. I went through the Operations Academy, learned about lean operations, and then did about 3 years worth of work in lean operations across several different industries. So I did a big project at a nuclear power plant, did some call center work, some operations, lean operations at call centers, work for an airline maintenance. So kind of cross industries, focusing on operations. Love that stuff. I continue to do some of that today, although my practice today also includes a lot of strategy and market landscape analysis kind of work.
So lean operations is how you'd characterize the bulk of your experience at McKinsey?
At McKinsey, that ended up being my focus, yes.
Okay. Now, when you went off on your own, I think a challenging place to start with is to broaden your experience as an independent. How did you go about doing that?
Well, let's see. I think the experience gets broadened through client projects. So let's see. I did a project for one of my early projects was kind of a lean operations type work. I was still in the period where I wasn't quite sure if I was going to stay with the independent thing or not, and I applied for a full-time job as VP of operations, for example, at a kind of small mid-size manufacturing company. I got an offer, my first interview from the CEO, and I thought actually this one would be better, and I told the CEO that I thought I could serve him better as a consultant. So I ended up serving as a consultant there for about 4 months, helping to revamp the operations, and then helped him hire a plant manager, and ended up becoming a bit of a advisor over the longer term to that CEO. And then other things have just the experiences come up through the client work. You do one thing, and the client asks you to help on something else. So I've done a lot of work around strategy, landscape analysis, serving, for example, head of M&A, helping a company think about, do we want to get into this sector? If so, who are the players? What's the economics? What's the value chain? So really a lot of it has grown through client work.
And in your independent consulting career, have you found any particular industry focus?
I continue to work across industries, but I'd say one thing that has grown for me in terms of functional type of work is this industry landscape assessment. So I've done probably a couple dozen of these, and they can take the form of due diligence for a private equity firm that's looking at a particular target, or serving a head of M&A or head of strategy where they're thinking about bringing their client into a new sector. But that is an area that I think lends itself very well to independent consultants, particularly if it's some kind of niche sector where there's not a lot of public coverage. I've developed some expertise about how do you source expert interviews to get into that space. How do you go to an industry expo and walk the trade show floor and develop some expertise, or even how do you use some creative ways, some guerrilla tactics to get some insights on the market, whether it's doing a survey at a trade show or through those expert interviews. Some interesting ways of getting insights on these kind of niche markets is an area where I've got a lot of experience.
Right. So you can go in and you can do this industry landscape assessment, which is certainly a kind of a niche offer. And it sounds like a good way to differentiate and specialize yourself. But you're saying you would do it for any industry. It doesn't matter. Your process can be applied to any industry.
Right. I mean, I've done it for, just to give you a few examples, the live plants industry in the United States. I've looked at the German auto industry market for the little tiny motors that operate your window up and down. Let's see, I've done it for things as random as certain types of industrial waste processing. So all over the place, the principles and the process is the same. I use freelancers on Upwork. I've done things like for a particular product, as an example, that's used in certain food service applications as a cleaning product. We wanted to get a global market share for this sort of very niche thing where there's no public coverage. So I organized on using Upwork and some other platforms, found freelancers in 20 countries around the world to actually visit some food service establishments in their city, ask the people behind the counter what they use to clean the machine in question, take pictures of that product, and consolidate it. So we got 200 data points from 20 countries around the world, and the client loved that, right? Because it was the first somewhat quantitative look at this industry that probably anyone had ever done. So that kind of niche industry, getting something really quick, something very affordable for clients, is an area that gets me excited.
And what's your process or approach to finding clients for that kind of work?
Well, I probably need to get some of your advice on how to do that. Frankly, we should probably talk about that. But so far, frankly, a lot of the work and some of the randomness of those different examples is because a lot of it has been referral based. So I do very little kind of outbound active marketing. It's mainly been one client that I served referring me to another one.
Yeah, and that works pretty well for a while at least. What are your prospects for the future? How do you want to grow the practice? What areas would you like to get into? Like, what are you seeing down the road?
Well, I continue to do my own consulting, which I also enjoy, and I'll probably continue to let that grow somewhat organically. I'm spending more of my time now on kind of a related venture to my own independent consulting practice, which is Umbrex, which is a global community of top-tier independent management consultants where we work on connecting top-tier independent management consultants with one another. So that's where I'm spending more and more of my time.
Got it. And I want to get to Umbrex in a minute, but before we do, a couple of more questions about that leap from McKinsey to independent. Now, I know
Sure.
from firsthand experience going from the big firm environment to, the smallest of the small, right? Independent is as small as it gets. That can be a pretty rocky road. How was the transition for you?
Well, I guess knock on wood, as I look back, it was, E.B. White said this about coming to live in New York. And he said, if you want to be successful in New York, you have to be willing to be lucky. And that's kind of how I feel about my own independent consulting practices. I was pretty lucky along the way. So, there were periods where I might have had 2 or 3 weeks between projects, but for the most part, had a pretty high utilization almost from the beginning. Again, a lot of that was luck. Just one client would randomly introduce me to a friend, or someone I had served at one company ended up at another, and then would give me a call. So a lot of inbound requests. So I ended up staying pretty busy. My strategy around pricing was to try to price my own services at a place where I would be at a pretty high utilization, like 90% plus. And after about the first year or two, I was kind of at that utilization basically since. So, and then just kind of gradually raise the rates over time as my, best alternative to a negotiated agreement got improved.
That is a very technical term. Luckily, I know what it means. But
the BATNA, right? So people have taken negotiation class, thought about the BATNA. What's your best alternative to negotiated agreement? So as I had more flow, more opportunities to sort of gradually raise the rates over time, but keeping it at a level that I was always able to stay busy, which then gets you more experience, gets you more referrals, kind of a virtuous cycle.
Right. So in layman's terms, once you have a strong pipeline and you've got a reputation and the opportunity cost for doing work at a certain price becomes too high, you can afford to raise your prices and take that step.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's tough with one client to raise your rates and say, hey, I was charging X, but now I'm going to charge you 2X, right? That's a little bit of a tough conversation, but exactly what you say. So I'd say, for people starting, is set your rates maybe kind of below market for someone with your experience. So you'll, get more project opportunities, because that's how you learn. And also, gets you referrals, and then it kind of builds. And then as you get more inbound flow, you can afford to turn some stuff away.
Got it. Let's jump into Umbrex now. Tell me the story of how Umbrex came together as an idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. So in 2008, when I started my own practice, at the same time, I read a book by Seth Godin, and I read Seth's blog every day. I've read like all his books now, and I read the book Tribes by Seth Godin, where he talks about building a community, building a tribe of people in your space. And I said to myself, okay, I'll do that for independent management consultants. And it started pretty small, just reaching out to a few people I knew from McKinsey that had left and started independent consulting. And it was great help to me because I didn't know anything about how to do it. Like, how do you write a statement of work? What should you include in a contract? And how do I get a template? How do I get an accountant, bookkeeper, insurance? What should I price? How do I close this deal? All these things, I had no clue. So it was great having some people with a little bit more experience. And then after a little bit of time, I started to be the person who was answering those questions for other people. And that sort of loose community grew. Also, not too long after I started it, a client reached out to me and asked for my help on a project, but I was not available myself. And I was able to find one of my peers from McKinsey, who is now independent, is able to staff him on that project. And so it worked out well for everyone. Worked out well for the client, worked out well for my friend. And I billed it through my firm and added a modest margin, so it worked out well for me. So over the years, that sort of has grown. That community's grown. 2013, I started organizing in-person gatherings of independent consultants that were part of this community that helped cement it even further. And people would kind of fly in from across the country. And then in 2015, one of those attendees that I'd met through this, Jing Lang, and I founded Umbrex, as a company to help make this a little bit more official, because I was kind of doing these events with no website or anything, and just to make it a little bit more official. So we started Umbrex in 2015. The original founding kind of members of Umbrex, community members, were people that had come to these events. And since over the last 2 years, it's now grown to have 300 members in 30 countries.
I think it's a fascinating idea, because I think a lot of folks, if they thought about doing something like this, would think, well, why would I organize and empower my competitors potentially, right? Like, all these independent consultants are potentially your competitors. And if you had a scarcity mindset, you might think of it that way. But what you've done is you've built this community, and in a very Seth Godin Tribes kind of way, you've positioned yourselves as the leader of this community. And it sounds like now clients are looking to you, and you're getting authority out of it because you're at the forefront of this organization. And that sounds like it's worked out quite well for you, even from a business perspective.
Well, I think you're right about the term kind of scarcity mindset. So I guess we try to adopt more of an abundance mindset, and thinking it's a big ocean of work out there. There's lots and lots of project opportunities. And frankly, I think for independent consultants, the biggest competitor is not other independent consultants, but it's about the client not doing the project at all. Right. So that's really the competitor. And it's not even really the big firms. It's just clients they have problems that they need to get solved. And and the biggest roadblock often is not, I'm not doing like an RFP against other people like me. It's just the client has trouble finding us at all. So it's been just personally very fulfilling to help build this community. We organize in-person professional development events for our members, and we do those at cost. So this year we had San Francisco, New York, and Berlin. Next year we'll do Salt Lake City, New York, and London. We do social events. So this fall we have New York, San Francisco, Chicago, DC. Do some across Europe. Those are a lot of fun. So we try to bring people together. We have online interaction, discussion as well for the members of the community. So, I mean, that's a really, I think, one challenge as an independent consultant is, how do you stay current? How do you continue learning and growing? How do you keep doing professional development and staying and having a community like this being able to have peers with similar training to you who are doing similar types of work and can have that kind of hallway conversation has been, hugely valuable to me personally, and I hope it's been valuable to the members of the community as well.
And I suppose it plays on this idea of, nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. And one of the challenges in hiring an independent consultant is the perceived risk that comes with that. But when you have a community like Umbrex, seems to me like it would help alleviate some of the fear and the concern that the risk that the buyer is facing, because it's a well-known entity, there's a brand, there's a community. It's not just one person, there's this whole group forming.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I'd say that probably the biggest barrier is for someone who's left, let's say, McKinsey or Bain or BCG, and maybe they were an associate partner or a partner at one of those firms, and now they're a senior vice president somewhere. They're probably personally quite comfortable engage and have the signing authority to hire, someone who was an engagement manager or associate partner or senior associate at one of those top firms. So they're probably personally comfortable making that hiring decision. The biggest barrier for independent consultants is kind of making that connection, and for them to actually find an independent consultant from one of those firms who is A, available, B, has the experience that they're looking for. So it's really just finding the right person is the challenge. And you can sort of see someone on paper, right, or on LinkedIn and say, well, that person's probably a good fit. But then the other challenge is like, have you met this person, face to face, and do they come across really well? Do they present well? Do they really actually seem professional? After you interact with them for a couple of days, that's tough if you're an executive and maybe you have a network already. But to find someone who's independent, has the credentials, is available, has the experience, that's it's a lot of fixed cost effort to go and find that person.
Right. So I'm curious to hear more about Umbrex's process with regards to that. How are you going from, identifying a client's need to then matching them with the right consultant? What does that look like?
So clients will contact us. We don't do, a lot of outbound marketing. But clients contact us and say, hey, Will, I have this project, here's what I need. And typically most of our clients are former consultants from big firms. So we kind of speak the same language, right? And they'll say, hey, I'm looking for, an engagement manager level person. Start date is, immediate or 2 weeks from now or whatever the start date is. Expect this is going to go for so long. I need someone. And then they'll describe the need. It's either sometimes it's really specific. I need someone who really knows financial services and knows how a commercial bank works. Or they might just say, look, for this one, I just need a good generalist who can, put a good document together for, a board presentation, and, industry experience isn't super important because we'll bring them up to speed, right? So they'll communicate the need and the scope, and they might say, hey, the person can work remotely, or hey, we really need someone who's based in Chicago for this because we're here, we don't want to pay for travel cost. So they'll kind of scope out the dimensions, and then, what we'll do is work on finding the right person who fits as many of those criteria as possible.
Now, in your experience working with independent consultants, and I know you've got a growing community over there at Umbrex, what are the things in your mind that kind of separate the cream of the crop from everybody else?
Well, let's see. I guess, and I'll put in a plug here for a great book that I recommend to members of our community. It's called The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients by David A. Fields. So, I recently read that book, and I think it answers answers this question pretty well. So I think people that get, our cream of the crop would be, they've really thought about what is their value proposition, right? So what's their kind of focus area? They know what kind of projects that they are focused on doing, that they are trained up and ready to do. So number three, they have built up some credibility around that topic area. So either, published something about it, spoken about it, or, even if they haven't published it publicly, they have some collateral that really makes a convincing case. It's much easier for me or for any intermediary or for clients to recommend someone to a friend when someone has something specific about them. Say like, hey, if you're ever doing, I could say, Ahmad, if you're ever doing need someone who really knows digital marketing in the financial services space, person XYZ is the person to talk to, right? That's much easier to remember if I'm at a cocktail party and someone is talking about their financial services and they, need a digital marketing person, that person's going to come to mind, right? Versus if I say, Joe Blow, I meet him and he says hey, I'm really looking for kind of any kind of project. I'm a generalist and I'll kind of do anything that needs a good senior associate. That person's not going to pop to mind, right? So I guess it's somewhat contradictory to what you might think, and I think you've even had a couple podcasts around this. That the more specific you are, the more memorable you become in terms of your focus area.
Yeah, and I think pricing is directly correlated with that, right? The more substitutes there are for, hey, I can do any kind of work, the less you can charge because there's many alternatives. But the fewer substitutes, the more that you can command a premium price.
Yeah, that's right. So you can, if you're saying, hey, if you're looking for anybody, well, I'm anybody. That's not nearly as compelling as, if you're looking for someone who, is, great at, product launches for pharmaceutical firms, or someone who's really focused on merger integration. Hey, that's memorable. If I have a merger integration project, that person's going to pop to mind.
Absolutely. Listen, Will, let's wrap this up with one final question. I want to know, what is the one best piece of advice you would offer to consultants who are building their own independent practice?
Wow. Let's see. I don't know. Okay. So I'd say, the first thing that comes to mind is can I give two?
Sure, you can give two.
Okay. So first, read the book Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield.
I love all of your book recommendations, by the way.
Right. Yeah. So turn pro, right? That's treat yourself like a professional, and that's going to cascade across a bunch of stuff. So I could probably give 15 recommendations. You limited me to one. You got me to. So first is read that book, Turn Pro. So that means, as one example of that, is clean up your LinkedIn profile, right? That is the first place. It's more important than your resume. So get a professional looking photograph, not a selfie with just get a professional photograph, spend the $200, right? Go through your whole LinkedIn profile and make it clear what kind of work you do, fill in all the details under all your old jobs. And you said I had two, but let me just add this one. I think about, if you want to get project opportunities, you got to think about Clark, right? Clark is CLARC. And those stand for C is contactable, right? If you want to get a project opportunity, you have to be contactable. Your contact information has to be out there. L, you have to be likable, or at least likable enough. You can't do much about that now, but A is available, right? People don't have to know that you're available to start next Monday, but they have to know in your network, the people that know you and respect you have to know that you're at least available in general for independent consulting projects. So you need to update your LinkedIn profile, and you need to let your friends know about that, and probably don't do that with a mass email. R is reliable. That means you always deliver on your promises, and C is credible. So put some things on LinkedIn, or publish, or speak, or do something to show you have some credibility.
Excellent. Will, that's great advice. We're going to have links to the books that you recommended in the show notes, as well as links to your LinkedIn profile. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up today?
Hey, Ahmad, I love your podcast. I've listened to a bunch of episodes of it. I'd also mention that I have been doing a podcast called Unleashed, How to Thrive as an Independent Professional, where I share some more tips and I interview successful independent consultants. So some more thinking is available on Unleashed, and it's available on iTunes or Stitcher.
And I can tell everyone else that is an excellent podcast. It's well worth a listen. We'll drop show notes to all of that in the show notes to this episode as well. Will, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
Hey, it's Ahmed here again. Before I let you go, there are two things I want you to do. The first is, if you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe to the show on iTunes or Google Play by visiting forecast.fm and clicking on the relevant link. While you're at it, please do leave us a rating or a review because it helps more people discover the show. The second thing is I want you to grab my free course on the 5 Ps of lead generation for professional services firms. Inside the course, you will get a step-by-step framework to help you generate a flood of new business for your firm. The course is 100% free of charge, and you can get immediate access at 5leadgen.com, and you can spell out 5 or use the number. Either one works. That's 5leadgen.com. Thanks for listening.